Now, Revelation 4 and 5 is the inauguration. Now, what I was going to say is there's been a lot of ink spilt or a lot of pixels about whether when Christ returned to heaven, he went to the holy place or the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary. And of course, Revelation 4 and 5 is pretty clear that he goes to the throne. He's on the throne in Revelation 4 and 5. He's pictured there in the middle. And I would propose to you that this is an unnecessary argument. Now, I'm not a theologian, and I'm sure there are scholars who would correct me and perhaps tell me that I'm mistaken. But as I understand it, the sanctuary on earth that Moses constructed was after the pattern of what was going on in the heavenly. That doesn't mean that heaven had golden furniture or anything. It just means that there was the sanctuary encampment and the things that went on there were representations of heavenly activity. And if that's true, and I believe that it is, then when Jesus was crucified, the veil between the holy place and the most holy place was rent from top to bottom. Thus, there was no separation between the holy place and the most holy place. So if that was a reflection, and I believe it was, of something happening in heaven, then if he went to the sanctuary in heaven, then it's the same room. It's now been, the veil is there, it's been ripped open, and it's one continuous thing. So we talk about his ministry changing, but you can have you can change your ministry in the same room. I do in this room. I write here, I broadcast here, I record. So I think that's something that we need to consider at least. All right. So the sanctuary in heaven in Revelation 4 and 5, we first see it. We see the throne room. We saw it last week in the lesson that we talked about. We see the throne room. We see the throne of God. We see the banners, the four living creatures, the four archangels, because there were four archangels in Solomon's temple. So that was last week. Now, as we move forward, now he was told to come up here, so it was the heavenly sanctuary. He moved up there. Revelation 8, we'll come to very soon, is where the angel begins by standing at the altar of incense, and that is an intercessory position because the prayers of the saints go over the veil and into the throne. So that's the intercession. The Tamid, the daily sacrifice, was taken there. We've talked about that extensively. Revelation 11 and 19, suddenly the Ark of the Covenant shows up, and that tells us that judgment is taking place in the sanctuary, because that's what it was on earth. The only time that the high priest went into the most holy place, the only time he went to see the ark, was on the Day of Atonement, which was full of symbolism of the end of all things. So, and there came flashes of lightning, rumbling, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a great hailstorm. Well, we have also here symbols that relate to the plagues that Moses brought on Egypt, and we also have echoes of Sinai, because when Moses was on the mountain, the children of Israel heard thunder and lightning, hear the voice of God, but they heard thunder and lightning and peals of thunder, all this sort of thing. So these ideas of judgment and meeting with God there are 11:19 and following. Revelation 15, we see an abandonment, and that sounds rather strange to us, but it says, out of the temple came the seven angels, and no one could enter the temple anymore. And before you get too concerned about this, because it sounds rather serious if they're abandoning the temple, by the time we get to Revelation 19, there's an absence. There's worship without the temple. There's no temple, we're told, in the New Jerusalem. And the reason is that when we get, a little too fast there. The tabernacle of God is with men. And that's what it's all about. That's what the sanctuary was about. Remember, in Exodus 25, I believe it is. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And so the purpose of the sanctuary is so that God can be with his people. And in Revelation 21:1 through 22:5, God is present. It says the tabernacle of God, the tabernacle of the sanctuary, is with men. So what happens is the action is taking place in heaven so that eventually it can take place on earth, the earth made new. And that's what's going on here. Now, this is a very common, we talk about this a lot. There are chiasms in the Bible. The ancient Greeks and the ancient Hebrews liked chiasms. And chiasms are named after the Greek letter chi, or chi, and it's shaped like an X. And the thing about an X is that it mirrors itself up and down or side by side. It's a mirror. And that's what a chiasm does, is it mirrors itself. The first thing in the chiasm, the first item, is mirrored by the last item, and so forth. Excuse me. And the model for this, you've already seen this, is the Gothic arch. This is one of the models for it. You see where you have things building up, and then the center is the focal point. The center of the chiasm is the focal point. And so when we take this to Revelation, there you see A, the first thing mentioned, is also mirrored by A prime. B is mirrored by B prime, and C is in the middle. Now, this one just happens to have 3 layers, but they can be a lot of them. It does happen. And so what we have here in Revelation 4 and 5 is where the sanctuary is inaugurated, where the service or the function of it begins in heaven, and here we have where it has ended. So you see the beginning and the end. There is a mirror here. In Revelation 8, we have the intercession, and there is no more intercession in Revelation 15. So the end of the intercession. And the centerpiece, which is the focus of the chiasm concerning the activity of the sanctuary in heaven, in the book of Revelation, the focus is the judgment. And indeed, we will spend a lot of time in 11 through 14, 15, 16, where we're talking about that sort of thing. The judgment, and that's what Revelation is about, and it's going to enter in very strongly tonight in tonight's lesson. All right. Let's make sure that I don't leave you without anything again here. All right. And our memory text for this week, I'll just scroll that up so you can see it more easily, is from Revelation 5. You were worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. So this is the declaration. We sometimes forget, especially in Adventism, we tend to focus on this sort of chapter by chapter. So it's like we do the 7 seals, and we do the 7 churches, and we do the throne room thing, and they're all discrete and separate. We chop them off. But the book of Revelation has a narrative. It has a story that begins in the beginning and runs all the way through. Now, it's broken up into chapters and pieces and several visions, but there is a continuing thing that's going on here. And we cannot forget, when we talk about the 7 seals, that just in the previous lesson in Revelation 4 and 5, John was weeping because no one was found who was qualified to open the 7 seals. It was completely, the 7 seals perfectly sealed. And so that was the question. There was no one qualified to do the 7 seals. Why was he crying? What's the excitement about? Why is there such a problem? Well, the answer comes down to that we forget that Jesus had gone to the sanctuary in triumph. This is the Lamb who has been slain, but he has conquered death. And the 24 elders are these resurrected saints, the ones who rose when he died. They are the captives he took captive, to quote Ephesians. He brought with him, as all ancient conquerors did, those who had been conquered by the previous emperor. He brought them home as trophies. But these he liberates. They were all dead. They had all been captives of death. And he leads them thou alive to the throne room itself. And this gives meaning to Colossians and some other things where we get to sit down in heavenly places. These 24 elders literally did this. And they are, because Pentecost, 4 and 5, is the first fruits feast. And the first fruits of the wheat harvest would have been brought at Pentecost. And so we know Christ is the first fruit of the resurrection, but so then are the 24 elders. They're part of this first fruit that is being offered to God himself. And so here is Christ. He is triumphant. The glory spills out into Pentecost on earth. And now what? Now what? We'll get to that. No, it's a scroll, so it isn't really completely. It isn't open till the whole thing is open. But remember that this is written on both sides, and so we have that in Zechariah. We talked about that last week. That should be still available. If it is not, make sure it's available. Zechariah had a scroll that was written on both sides, and that scroll we found out was the law, the Ten Commandments, because on one side, those who were thieves were cursed, and on the other side, those who took God's name in vain were cursed. So you had the two tables of the law on the two sides of the I just got. My youngest daughter just said my youngest grandchild would like to talk to Papa. Well, I'm sorry, I can't work that out very well, but hello. I don't have FCC problems, so hello, Evelyn. Anyway, I have to move on here. So this scroll that is rolled up is the law, and how is the law going to be justified? How is it going to be vindicated? That's part of what's taking place here. 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary and the law of God be vindicated. And so the question is, Jesus has defeated death, and he's gone to heaven in glory. He's taken with him captives, those who had been dead, and they're now alive. And so the question that John has is, now what? Now what? How long? What's going to take place? What are you going to do? Because yes, it's marvelous in heaven, and it's wonderful that you conquered death, but earth is still earth. It's still full of sorrow and sin and depredation. And so what are you going to do about it? What is your plan? How does that law, how does that scroll become enacted, become vindicated, become acted out in history? What happens next? And he's crying because he wants to know what next. What's going to happen? How is this going to be resolved? And that's what the seals begin to show us. So when we're talking about the seven seals and opening the seven seals, we need to understand that that's the context in the narrative of Revelation in which this is taking place. That God, the Christ now having conquered and been given all this power and all this judgment, and he's the only one qualified. He is now qualified to break the seals and show how God is going to finish off dealing with the sin problem. He's conquered death, but it still reigns somewhat on earth. This is what some call the tension of the already and the not yet. Christ is already Lord. He has already conquered death, and yet he's not Lord of all in our lives. He isn't Lord of all everywhere. Death still exists on this earth. So what's going on here? Well, I've used this example, I think even in some of these broadcasts. My granddaughter is distracting me through my daughter here. Yes, hi, Papa. Hi, Evelyn. Anyway, I'm going to have a hard time, if she keeps this up, but I'm enjoying it. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah. So this has to be acted. It has to be taken forward, and we live in the tension of the already and the not yet. And so it's very similar to a warfare. When in the Civil War there was the Battle of Gettysburg, everybody knew after the Battle of Gettysburg, everybody knew that it was only a matter of time until the South lost. They were defeated, but they were not yet destroyed. Same is true in World War II in Germany, in Europe, when the Battle of the Bulge was over. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler had committed all of his reserves in trying one last big gamble, and they ended up being destroyed. And so from that moment forward, everybody knew that the war was going to end with Germany losing, but it wasn't yet over. The enemy was defeated, but not yet destroyed. And that's where we are today. At Calvary, death and Satan and sin were defeated. That is the celebration in Revelation 4 and 5. But they're not yet destroyed. And that is what is going to be revealed in the seals and the following things, is that slowly we're going to see how God, having defeated Satan, how he is ultimately going to destroy Satan, and how he will become not only the conqueror of death in the sense that it has been conquered in the past, but death itself will be the last enemy that will be destroyed. Death is conquered, it's defeated, but we see it every day. It's not yet destroyed. So that's what's happening here. That's why John was weeping, and that's why he's so excited when someone is found who can do this. Okay, so now the conqueror of death is going to show us what's going to happen, how this is going to be carried out in the future. All right. I hope that makes all that clear. My favorite thing to do when I'm teaching these lessons is to be literally in front of a group of people and have back and forth. But we're doing the best we can. Eventually, we'll see if I can get some two-way here. All right. So the Lamb is found, and now everyone in the throne room and all the creatures that were saying amen and praising God, which was every creature everywhere, were waiting with bated breath, literally. What is going to happen? And here we are with Revelation 6:1. Then I saw, when the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a voice, as with a voice of thunder, "Come." So this is the first thing that happens. He breaks one of the seals. And one of the four living creatures, we talked about those, the archangels, and they're the banners around the sanctuary encampment. And one of them says, "Come." And we also talked about how hearing and seeing is key to understanding these prophecies. Well, he heard the voice say, "Come," and I looked, and he beheld a white horse. And he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. Now, I've done the block diagram here because I changed the word order. It's for us, I want to keep the noun and the verb. "To him was given" is just easier for us to it's more consistent here. But the word order is actually "a crown was given to him." So I show that I have moved those phrases, crossing out where they were, moving back here just to do this. This is a legal, a logical construction. So now, a crown was given to him. We talked about this a little bit last week. The crowns that the 24 elders had were Stephanoi, plural of Stephanos. A Stephanos is a crown of victory. It's a laurel wreath. It's what the athletes in the Olympics received. So that's what that's what he's receiving. This is a crown of victory. So we know who it is that has gained the victory and who can sit on a white horse. In fact, he's going to show up again on this same white horse later in the book. This is Jesus. And he went out conquering and to conquer. So that's the very first thing that he says, okay, I've conquered death on earth, and I brought back captives who were dead. And now that is going to continue. That is to say, I'm going to bring life, bring myself to more and more people. The gospel will go forth, conquering and to conquer. And so that's the first part of the plan. The first seal, the most important thing, is that Jesus himself will continue to manifest his power to his people, to all those who are his on this earth. That's the first thing. When he broke the second seal, now who is he? Yeah, she may call them out, but they're definitely human beings. We talked. Last week's lesson I gave plenty of evidence on that. There's never a time in the Bible. Anyway, I'll refer you to that. I can't revisit that and do this at the same time. When he broke the second seal, well, the Lamb broke the first one, and he's the only one who's qualified. So it has to be the Lamb who broke the second seal. I heard the second living creature saying. So he heard one of the living creatures say it. Now here's the second living creature. So what we see with these first 4 seals probably is one after another the living creatures is going to be introducing what's going on here. All right. And the saying, come. And another horse, a red one, went out. And to the one who sat on it was granted to take peace from the earth. So Christ is going forth conquering. He is bringing the gospel. He is bringing his peace. But warfare is still going to take place. And he has a great sword. The great sword is given to him. It's to take peace from the earth and that men would slay one another. And a great sword was given to him. So first the gospel goes out conquering and to conquer. That's more important than anything else. And secondly, warfare continues. Warfare goes on. We still have wars and rumors of wars, and we will, until the second coming. Then he broke the third seal. I heard the third living creature say, so here you see, it's these living creatures, one after another, saying, come. I looked, and behold, a black horse. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. Now, I've used these blue dotted lines here to indicate that these are he sat and he had. The verbs are both connected to this. And he had a pair of scales in his hand. And of course, a scale, when we're talking about scales, you're talking about a balance, the 2 baskets with the arm here, and you weigh one thing against another. And that is, he's weighing things. There's a kind of judgment going on here too. But then he hears something. So he sees the scales, and he hears something going on, a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures. Well, now, we know who is in the center of the 4 living creatures. It's either God the Father or the Lamb himself, because that's who's there. So they've been speaking. Now we hear a voice, something like a voice, in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine. What's going on here? Well, a denarius, often the King James, this was, and I believe it was here, translated a penny. If you remember the parable about the vineyard workers, the ones who came in the morning were given a penny, and the ones who were hired later were also given a penny, or a denarius. A denarius was, in fact, a day's wage for a very long time, for centuries in Rome. An ordinary worker for ordinary labor got 1 denarius a day. Now, it's very interesting that the amount of denarius was a silver coin. The amount of silver tended to decrease over time, inflation and all that. But here's the thing. A quart of wheat, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. So if you had a denarius, you could buy one or the other. Okay? And a quart of wheat was a ration, one ration for 1 Roman soldier for 1 day. They had more than wheat, but that's how much wheat they got. So in other words, you worked all day to eat 1 day's food. That's what this is saying. Well, my friends, that's famine. It's famine then and it's famine now. Imagine if you spend 40 hours a week, you work 5 days, and you earn 5 days worth of food and nothing else. That's famine. That is hardship. And do not damage the oil and wine. There are a number of interpretations for this one. The one I prefer is that this is a reflection of the warfare that took place at that time. This is war. This is he's a black horse, and he's what happens is when war takes place, people kill one another, but that's not the only thing. Armies go through and they burn crops, and famine follows. So you have warfare, and then you have famine. And what, of course, if you wanted to, this happened in World War II, and it's happened throughout history, that sometimes they would burn the crops to deprive the people of food, to deprive the enemy of food. But you don't. You burn wheat and barley are annuals. You plant them in the spring, and then you harvest them that same year. But oil and wine, this is olive oil and wine. Oil comes from olive trees, and wine comes from vines. And if you have a fruit tree, you don't plant it one day or 1 year and get apples or pears or whatever the next year. It takes years. And so if you wanted to occupy the land, you might burn the food so that the people couldn't defend themselves, but you didn't want to, then when you're going to occupy it, be without trees and without vines, because it would take you years to get it back. Whereas the next year, you could plant barley and wheat and have grain. But you couldn't just plant the trees and the vines and have the oil and wine. So this probably is a reflection of warfare as they experienced it in the first century. At least that's what I think it is. There are other theories, and they may or may not be valid. I don't promise to be exhaustive in this. So what you have here now is you have warfare. Peace was taken from the earth. Men are slaying one another. And then you have famine. Well, that's what happened in the ancient times, and frankly, that's what happens even today. When we have warfare, the tanks and the troops tear up the ground, and they destroy the crops, and the people where the war goes starve. This happened in the South during the Civil War, even before Sherman took on his rather scorched earth policy. And so this is what happens. So the gospel is going to go forth, but war is going to continue. Famine is going to continue. In other words, sin is, as I said, sin may be destroyed, but it's not, or maybe defeated, but it's not destroyed. It's still active, and it's still carrying out the depredations that are natural to this world. So there they are. We have that. When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." So now we have it pretty clear. One living creature after another, these archangels, these covering cherubs in the most holy place, the four living creatures around the throne, who also have the banners, the faces of the banners of the children of Israel. One after another, they announce the horseman. The first one, and I like to think that they start with Judah as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, as though is Christ on that horse. Maybe not, but I think there's some validity to that. I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." So one after another they have announced this, and I looked and behold. Now this is an interesting, NASB says an ashen horse. I promised you a horse of a different color. And the interesting thing is that in the Greek, the color of this horse is chloros, from which we get chlorophyll, the green pigment that helps plants make food. We also get chlorine, which is a yellow-green gas. So this is chloros. This is a green horse. Some perhaps irreverent people have suggested it might be gangrene. But when wounds become necrotic, when the flesh starts to die, sometimes it does go through a very sickly green. And I think that's what is going on. Is that this is the decay and the putrefaction that comes. You have war and killing, you have famine, and now you have disease and death in its many forms, because people who are starving have compromised immune systems. The dead bodies and other things can cause disease. This is the reality of war. It is always the reality of war. And so what you see going on in these first 4 seals is the gospel will go forth, and people will be saved, and they will come to Christ, and they will conquer the second death. He's conquered the second death, but the first death will still be among us, will still be going on. And all of these terrible things that we've experienced. And he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Now Hades is not hell. Hades is the grave. It is the dwelling place of the dead in Greek. And so Hades was following with him. So this is exactly the picture you'd have. You'd have warfare, you'd have famine, you'd have disease and death and the grave. And that's what's happened. Authority was given to them. I really can't go on about this too much at this time. We'll get into this later. But you'll see again and again that authority is given. God is in control. Never lose sight of that. Authority is given to them. Excuse me here. I get a little tickle there. Authority is given to them over what? 1/4 of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Again, this is what happens with warfare. This is what goes on. And so what Jesus is telling with this plan, these seals as they're opened up, is that sin will continue. But the most important thing is that the gospel will go forth conquering and to conquer. He's going to win in the end. And all those who are gathered to him he won't lose any of them. And notice that he's given given authority over 1/4 of the earth. Well, this is kind of interesting, because we're going to have a bunch of things that happen when we get to the trumpets. They're going to happen to 1/3 of the earth. And it is at least possible, you have 4 horsemen here, and this one horse, one of the 4, is given a authority over 1/4 of the earth. 1/4. So it's possible that these horses are even each given control. So when 1/3 of it, it's one of the 3 bad horses. We have the good horse, the conquering horse, the white horse, but there are 3 of the others. And so it's very possible the thirds are manifestations of one of these 3, or maybe all of them. But anyway, one of these 3 horses, what happens to 1/3 and so forth, because he's given authority over 1/4 of the earth. And now we come to not quite the climax, but really a tremendously significant thing here. When the Lamb broke the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. Now, we talked about a couple of weeks ago about the Tamid, the daily service, and here is the 4th stage of the daily service. The first one was trimming the lamps. The second one was throwing the great door, which we saw at the beginning of chapter 4. The third one is the lamb which was slain, which we saw in chapter 5. And here we have step 4, underneath the altar, because the base of the altar is where the blood of the sacrifices was poured out. And there's this sense that these souls have been poured out. They're martyrs. That's where the location of the blood from the sacrifice goes. And here those who were slain. So it's the idea, that's what's here, the base of the altar. And they cried out. He saw them. He saw them there. They died because of the word of God and the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? If we see the narrative, the story of Revelation being enacted here, John was weeping because he wanted someone to open up the seals so that the scroll could be opened. He could find out what God's plan was. And as the first 4 seals are opened, we see the gospel goes forth, but so does war, and so does famine, and so does pestilence. And it's a natural thing that the saints are saying, wait a minute. We thought something different was going to happen. How long does this go on? How long does it go on that we still have, yes, we have the gospel, but we still have war, we still have famine, we still have pestilence, we have death, we have the grave. How long will this continue? It's a natural question. And the answer they get is the answer we have to give sometimes. Now, Christ knows, God knows the end from the beginning, but we don't. And we forget that prophecy is not given so that we may become prophets. Prophecy is given so that we may believe, as John tells us. And so he's not going to tell them all the details. It is not given to us to know all the details. And to each of them there was given a white robe. Now the white robes are only worn by the saints and by Christ. And the elders wear white robes, which is another indication that they are, in fact, humans. And they were told that they should rest for a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. In other words, how long until you begin to judge? How long until you begin to right these wrongs? How long does the blood, like Abel's, cry out from the ground, and there is no justice, there's no punishment, there is no recompense? How long? And the first word is, a little while yet. A little while. And there it is. This is what goes on in the earth. Just as we have the Tamid is the everyday sacrificial system of the temple, and it's going to go on until the end time. The end time, in 1119 and following, we have a new kind of thing beginning to happen. But for however many centuries that is, the Tamid, the daily, the continual thing goes on. And here we have the same thing being reiterated by the seals. And that is the gospel, since Christ has in fact conquered death, and he has conquered sin. He's defeated them, but not destroyed them. It's a little while until they'll be destroyed. Now, when I was a young boy, I never thought I would reach this age for a lot of reasons. It never occurred to me that I might face death myself before Christ would come. But that's the reality of it. I'm 68. I remember 48 very well. It didn't seem very long ago, and if that's true, well, I hope to make it to 88, but there's no guarantees. But how long will it go on? We all want to know that. We look at the world around us and we say, how much worse can it get? And the answer is twofold. The first part of the answer is the answer that's given this week, and that is in the seals. Just rest. Rest in the Lord. Psalm 37. For a little while longer. And you know, that is really a key to the book of Revelation too. Those who are in the Lord have rest. That's what the Sabbath is about. It's about rest. It's about shalom. It's about peace. It's okay. I understand. Terrible things are happening. But trust me. Rest a little while longer. There are some more things. There are more who are going to join you. Sad but true. But remember that anyone who's in Christ shall live even though he dies. He is the resurrection and the life. So that's not, we don't like it. We don't enjoy it. It's not a good thing that we die. But we have to understand that, as the message says in Romans 6, death no longer has the last word. And that's true here. But this is what I see very much like the blood of Abel crying out from the ground. Here's the blood of the saints crying out from the base of the altar and saying, how long until you judge? How long until justice is established? And it covers the earth like the waters cover the sea. How long? First part is rest. There's some more to join you. But he gave them white robes. Rest. You have overcome. You have conquered. All of those promises in the churches to him who overcomes, that's what they've got. They've got that. They have overcome. They've won those prizes, and they can rest. We can rest in the knowledge that our loved ones who've gone have already gained that. They can live again. So there we have the fifth seal. The fifth seal is a real turning point because, again, you see the first four seals, that this plan, he's pulling the seals one by one, so the scroll is unrolled, and the plan of how he's going to translate his victory over death already into the destruction of death and sin. And the first thing we see is that even though the gospel goes on, we still have to live with sin and death. Then he broke the sixth seal. I looked, and there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when it is shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up. And every mountain and island were moved out of their places. All right. So this is clearly the end of the world. And you have these interesting signs. Someone mentioned we have signs. Yes. And here they are. Now, question becomes, are these symbolic in the sense of, is it the literal moon? Is it the literal sun? Probably the best indication that I have, and I'm not certain on this, the best indication I have on this is that for the most part, when we see in Revelation, we have what are called metaphors. That is, a metaphor says the moon was blood, but this says the whole moon became like blood. Like blood is a simile, and so we're saying that there was a real moon, but it looked like blood. Now, this is something that's happened several times in there. So it happened just recently. We had a blood moon. The sun becomes darkened in midday. It happens every time there's a total eclipse, but there are other things. There was the great forest fire in New England, and there have been other times when the sun has been blackened and darkened. Now, you may be concerned whether I'm discounting certain dates and signs. I'm not. I'm simply saying that these are things which have happened more than once, and they may yet happen again. I don't know the answer to that. The dark day, and was it 1789? I think it was, and the moon turned to blood that same night, and then the Perseid showers in 1833, which were unique, certainly directed the attention of people toward these prophecies and toward the end of the earth. Don't forget that William Miller began studying the end time prophecies in 1831, so 1833 with that Perseid shower, and it was an unusually heavy one. It must have been startling. And we say that stars fall to earth all the time. I saw a falling star, we'll say. So that's nothing unusual. What was unusual about 1833 was the overwhelming number. However, I don't know that it won't happen again. And I think these are literal because they're all similes rather than metaphors. It doesn't say the sun became a sackcloth or became a coal or a black hole or something. It says became black as sackcloth. It was so the whole moon became like blood. So these are similes rather than metaphors, and I think that's what it's about, what it's talking about. And then it says the sky was split apart like a scroll when it was rolled up. Well, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but these are clearly apocalyptic, not only in the sense that they're occurring in the book of Revelation, but these are the kinds of things that if you experience them, you think the world's coming to an end. Every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And then we have this ending. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, the rich and the strong, and every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. What's going on here? Well, first of all, you have these frightening occurrences that are taking place. And surely it's the end of the world. That's what people are saying. Surely it's the end of the world. And they run to the caves and the rocks, and they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Okay? For the great day of their wrath has come. That is the day of the Lord in the Old Testament. This is the end time. The opening of the sixth seal is introducing us to the very end of time. Now, we said before, when we come to these things, they all seem to end at the very end of time, but then the next sequence comes and we are zooming in. We're taking this last bit and we're expanding it so we can see it in more detail. And it's interesting because the 24 elders threw their crowns and they glorified God. But here, all of these people are terrified. And they're terrified of the Lamb. Who's terrified of the Lamb? Well, I think this is another sort of a manifestation that this is the Lion and the Lamb. He is the Lion to those who have spurned him, and he's the Lamb to those who have accepted him. And that's what's going on here. But they when they see the Lamb, when the wicked see the Lamb, they see the Lion. That's what they're seeing. When they see Christ, they see the Lion. When we see Christ, I hope, we see the Lamb. For their wrath has come. And there is these two. And who is able to stand? Who is able to stand? Well, the only one who's able to stand in the wrath of God is the Lamb himself. And we are in him, then we are saved. So, that's what I think is happening with these seals. As we begin to see, there's going to be more taking place, a lot more taking place in chapter 7 when we get there. But I promised you the horse with a different color. We had the green horse. That's exactly right. When I was rehearsing earlier, I said that same thing. When we see God, we say, "Lo, here is our God. We waited for him." And when the evil, the wicked see him, they say, "Hide us, fall down, crush us under the rocks. We just want to be hidden from the glory of his coming." And so that's what's happening here. And this often happens. John is weeping because no one can open it. When it's opened, it isn't all he hoped for exactly. He kind of had other plans. And we need to keep this in mind because prophecy, too many of us think that we know what prophecy means, that we've got everything lined up and prophecy is going to happen just exactly the way we expect it to. But it didn't happen that way for the Pharisees, and many of them had whole chapters and whole books of the Old Testament memorized. It didn't happen that way for our own pioneers who misinterpreted some of these things. it happens again and again that even those who are devout, prophecy takes place, but not in the way you expect. And that's why it's important to continue to have faith and to continue to develop a relationship with God. If we are continually, I love what Billy Graham said way back a long time ago. I think it was 1966 when Time magazine had the cover that said, "God is dead." And Billy Graham had the perfect answer for that. He said, he can't be. I spoke to him this morning. Now, that may be a little flip, but it's also true for those of us who are in relationship and experience him in our lives. We know he's not dead. Yes, Brownman, I did see that John said that in his book, when he wrote he did a book for the Gospel of John, when he wrote the Sabbath school lessons for John about 10 years ago. I'd have to look it up. He had dedicated that to me and said I was his favorite teacher. I'm gratified. I'm humbled. I found this morning in an email exchange with him, I am astonished that apparently he is screening these whole things because he wants to see how I go about it. But anyway, it's God's gift to me, not my gift to anyone else. I just try to share the excitement that I find in studying Scripture. Well, as far as there are several questions about whether the 24 elders were humans. Again, I would refer you to the previous lesson because I go into considerable detail about how they pretty much have to be human beings. Let's put it this way: I'm not God, I am not prophet, so I could be wrong. But I'm as certain as I can be that the 24 elders are human beings. And I find this whole study fascinating. Again, to put this in context, that what is God's plan? Well, God's plan is that, sin is going to continue. Sin, they said, like Gettysburg, like Battle of the Bulge, sin and death are defeated, but they're not yet destroyed. And so they were defeated. He knows that. He took his hostages hostage. He went to the throne room triumphant. And John was saying, now that you're triumphant, what are you going to do about what's going on here on earth? And the answer is in the seals. This is my plan moving forward. And we're going to find out very soon that he's not the only one that has plans. The other thing is, I said that, well, I will be glad to dialogue with you on that separately, Don, if you'd like to do that. Right now, I need to close this up because I've taken all the time I should. But I want to say this: I said that the first part, when they said, "How long, O Lord, until you judge and you give us justice? We want justice," which is certainly a reasonable thing to want. How long until you give us justice? Next week, there we go. And we'll do Revelation 7, which is a very interesting chapter, and I had a very interesting interchange with some of Jehovah's Witnesses once on that. Anyway, and that I find fascinating. In a couple of weeks, we will find out the second part of the answer. The first part of the answer is rest. You have the white robes. You have overcome. There's a little while yet that this has to go on. And oh no, don't apologize, Don. I'm perfectly happy. It's just that it's very difficult here, and there are other people who are not interested in that particular point at this moment. Anyway, the second part of the answer we will find in a couple of weeks is very encouraging and very exciting. At least I think so. So yes, wait, be at peace, be at rest. But God's at work. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's useful for you. Again, if you have questions or comments, suggestions, be glad to do them. And again, I'll be glad to engage anybody that I can through private messaging or whatever on some of these other issues. Until next week, then, may the Lord bless you. I'm snowed in right now. My driveway is drifted in, but that should be taken care of soon. And no worries, because I'm warm and very blessed. Thank you for coming, and I hope you can join me in the future. I hope this has really whetted your appetite for more of the Scriptures. Till next week, then.